Newport, Rhode Island, 1880. Beneath the grandeur of sweeping mansions and the clink of champagne glasses, the truth festered like a bruise beneath silk. The Gilded Age had wrapped Newport in gold-leaf elegance, but for those who knew where to look, shadows danced just behind the curtains. Into this opulence arrived Evelyn Harrow, barely 22, graceful, enigmatic, a woman with honey-burnished hair, eyes like storm clouds, and secrets stitched into the seams of her velvet gowns. She was not born into Newport's world, she was invited, and that was rare. The Harrow family had recently fallen from grace in New York society. Her father, a once celebrated shipping magnate, lost everything in a scandal involving a capsized vessel and 23 dead. The press said he bribed investigators. His heart gave out not long after. Evelyn's mother drank herself into oblivion by year's end. Alone, Evelyn was taken in by her distant cousin, Florence Braddock, an icy Newport widow with wealth, influence, and the warmth of a headstone. Florence had one rule: be silent, be seen, and never embarrass the family. But Evelyn was not made for silence. She walked among the Newport elite like a ghost in bloom. The men adored her, the women watched her with sharpened smiles. At soirée, she floated from room to room as if summoned by candlelight, yet her presence was unsettling. A touch too poised, a laugh that didn't quite reach the eyes. Within months, rumors bloomed like rot, that she spoke to herself in the rose gardens at midnight, that she never slept, that servants found dead birds near her window, always headless, but Florence dismissed it all. Nerves, she said, grief. The truth? Something had followed Evelyn to Newport. Something old. In her first summer at the Braddock estate, 4 servants quit without notice. One, Anne Price, jumped into the bay and was never recovered. Her final words, whispered to a priest hours before she vanished, chilled even the clergy. There's something in the girl, something watching through her skin. But Newport didn't listen. Newport never listened. By autumn, Evelyn had become the centerpiece of high society. She was painted, praised, and paraded at every event. Yet there was a growing unease, unspoken, like mold behind wallpaper. Animals wouldn't go near her. Candles flickered out when she entered a room, and Florence Braddock, usually so composed, began locking her bedroom door. Evelyn's smile never changed, but her eyes had grown colder, not with malice, but with the weariness of someone who'd been watched for too long. The Braddock estate, once whispered about for its imported marble and 10-acre gardens, held a secret few ever questioned: the East Wing. Long corridors, rarely used. Windows forever shut. No visitors allowed. Even Florence Braddock, for all her dominion, never lingered there. Servants cleaned it in silence, never alone, and never after dark. Evelyn, of course, was drawn to it. One rain-slick afternoon in September, the house fell into a rare hush. No footman, no piano, just the soft tick of Florence's ivory clock. Evelyn wandered. She moved like smoke through the gallery hall, her fingertips brushing dust-laced portraits of ancestors forgotten by time, dead-eyed aristocrats with powdered faces and rigid necks. But then, in the heart of the East Wing, she found it. A painting. Nearly 10 feet tall, blackened with age. Its frame was obsidian wood, carved with a strange pattern of vines, serpents, and something watching. No nameplate, no artist's signature. But the subject was unmistakable. A woman. And she looked exactly like Evelyn. Same hair, same delicate lips, same haunted stare. Her dress was not of any known era, deep crimson, corseted with bone lace. Her hands rested over her stomach, clutching something that could have been a crucifix. Or a dagger. Her eyes, however, were the worst. They were alive. And angry. Evelyn stood, frozen. The storm outside thundered. Her breath fogged the air despite the hearth's glow. When she finally turned away, she swore she heard footsteps behind her. Slow. Bare. That night she asked Florence about the portrait. The old widow grew pale. That painting has no place here, she said, her voice dry. It arrived before my husband died, uninvited. The gallery was locked. The staff swore it simply appeared. And the woman? Evelyn asked. Florence's lips trembled. Her name was Ermina. That's all I ever learned. Some say she was a Braddock ancestor. Others say she was something far older, a foreign bride brought here in the 1600s, hidden away after unspeakable things began happening, children missing, dreams that bled into reality. Florence paused, then added, The portrait is never to be moved. Ever. But Evelyn had already begun dreaming of Ermina. In the dreams, Ermina stood at the foot of her bed, not smiling, not speaking, just watching. And behind her, shapes moved, flickering in and out of the dark like puppets jerked by invisible strings. By the third night, Evelyn woke with blood beneath her fingernails. Her door had remained locked. She told no one. But the servants knew. One chambermaid found Evelyn standing in front of the painting at dawn, whispering. Another claimed Evelyn's reflection in the hallway mirror didn't move when she did, and Florence began sleeping in the guest house, because something was happening, and the portrait in the east wing had opened its eyes. October brought a sharpness to Newport's air. Leaves turned brittle and the sky stayed grey for days at a time. With each gust of wind, the Braddock estate seemed to creak louder, like it remembered something it wished it could forget. Evelyn's dreams of Ermina continued, but they were no longer just dreams. One morning, a book appeared on her dressing table, a large leather-bound volume with a cracked spine and brass clasp, unlabeled, uninvited. She asked no one about it. Instead, she opened it. Inside, yellowing pages covered in names, ages, and dates of death. It was the Braddock funeral ledger. Chapter 93. Lillian Braddock, 8 years old. Fevered hallucinations. Teen 12. Matthew Braddock, 11. Fell from nursery window. 39. Mercy Braddock, 6. Choked in her sleep. The list went on. Dozens of children, all under 12, all within the East Wing. The final entry chilled Evelyn to the bone. 75. Florence's only son, William Braddock, 9. Missing, never recovered. Scrawled beneath it, in a darker ink, the Red Woman returns when the bloodline fails. That phrase Evelyn would see again, carved into the underside of her bedroom vanity, etched into a mirror frame, whispers of it in nursery rhymes sung by local children, though none knew what it meant. Florence refused to speak of William. When asked, her face turned to stone. But Evelyn could see it, the rot behind her eyes. Whatever happened to William hadn't ended. That evening, Evelyn watched from the upstairs balcony. Below, in the fog-thick gardens, a figure moved between the hedges, barefoot, dressed in red. She blinked. Gone. When she told Florence, the old widow snapped. "You were not brought here to dig up the dead," she barked. "Stay out of the East Wing. Stay out of the family's past." But Evelyn couldn't. That night she returned to the gallery. The painting of Ermina looked different. The hands no longer held anything. They were empty, open. And Evelyn saw something else. Faint outlines near Ermina's feet, small shapes, like children. She dropped the ledger. It landed on a floorboard that sounded hollow. Her heart raced. She tore up the rug and pried it loose. Beneath it, a compartment filled with damp linen and brittle dolls, and resting atop them, a single lock of blonde hair, tied with a blue ribbon. The initials WB embroidered into the ribbon. William Braddock. Evelyn stepped back. From the end of the hallway, a cold draft swept through, but there were no open windows, and the soft sound of children crying, muffled far away, rose from beneath the floorboards. Then the candle in her hand flickered out, and someone behind her whispered, "She knows you're here." By November, frost laced the windows of the Braddock estate, icing over the gardens like a veil over a corpse. Newport's social season had slowed. The last garden party faded into memory, but inside the manor something stirred. Evelyn had broken Florence's command. She had entered the East Wing. The corridor smelled of mildew and perfume long expired. The wallpaper peeled like dead skin. Mirrors were draped in black cloth. Every doorknob was cold to the touch. Even the air felt heavier, as if morning lingered there. At the end of the hall stood a door with no keyhole. Its surface bore faint scratches, as if something once trapped inside had tried, desperately, to claw its way out. She entered the first room on the left. It was a child's nursery. Dust coated everything, rocking horses, blocks, dolls with glass eyes. A cradle rested in the corner, untouched but strangely clean, too clean. Evelyn crossed the floor, her foot pressed against a loose board. It moaned beneath her. Then, thump, from the ceiling above. She froze. Another thump, and then the dragging of something heavy. But the east wing had no upper floor, only attic crawl space. Evelyn backed out of the nursery. She turned to find a young maid standing behind her, pale, trembling. Her name was Marianne, 16, quiet, the only servant who hadn't yet quit. "You shouldn't be here, miss," she whispered. "Why?" Marianne hesitated. Then, "This part of the house remembers." Evelyn frowned. "Remembers what?" The girl lowered her gaze. "The children. They weren't sick. They were offered." Evelyn grabbed her by the wrist. "What do you mean, offered?" Marianne flinched. "She needs blood to stay buried, the one in red." "Who?" Marianne only looked up the stairwell. Her lips barely moved. "You've seen her already. In the garden. In your dreams." "Ermina?" "No," she whispered. "Ermi." Na was the first, but not the last. She pulled away and ran down the corridor. Evelyn turned back to the hallway. Behind her, the door without a keyhole creaked. It opened. No wind, no draft, no reason. Inside, the room was pitch dark, but Evelyn saw something. A mirror, undraped, alone, its glass warped, cracked. She stepped closer. Her reflection stood still, then blinked a beat too late. And behind her image, a woman in red. Lips split in a grin too wide. Hands pressed against the inside of the mirror. Then a sound echoed through the corridor. Children. Singing. But backward. The Braddock estate was built not just of stone and timber, but of secrets, its foundations buried more than roots. And on a night when the wind howled like grieving mothers, Evelyn Harrow discovered something the house had long tried to forget. She had been tending the hearth in the small parlour, a room rarely used, its furniture still draped, its windows sealed tight. The firewood crackled unnaturally loud that night, each pop like a bone snapping. One log rolled aside. Beneath it the floor was uneven. Curious, she knelt and brushed back soot. Her fingers caught on the edge of a loose brick, old, scorched, and oddly warm. With effort, she pried it loose. Behind it, a cavity. Inside, a journal, bound in red leather, pages yellowed with time. The name on the first page was written in tight, nervous script. Ermina Braddock, 1872. The child from the portrait, the girl no one spoke of. Evelyn lit a candle and began to read. The entries started innocently. Birthday parties, piano lessons, a pet raven named Solomon. But slowly, Ermina's words grew darker. Nurse says the lady in the mirror only comes when I lie. Last night I saw her standing at the end of my bed. She was wearing my mother's face. The man with the burned mouth whispered through the floorboards again. He says I'll never grow up. Evelyn turned the page. The ink was smeared. Red fingerprints stained the margins. The handwriting deteriorated. I buried the rabbit, but she still found it. Mama says I must drink the tea, but it smells like the garden after rain when the worms come out. The final entry was a scrawl. Tonight is the ceremony. The red room. She says if I let her in, she'll give me back Papa. Evelyn closed the book. Her hands were shaking. The fire had gone out. She hadn't noticed. Behind her the candle flickered. A cold breath swept across her neck. She turned. No thing. But then, faintly, a child's voice behind the walls. It's your turn now. Evelyn ran, down the hallway, up the stairs, into her bedroom. But the journal was no longer in her hands. It was on her pillow, open, to a page that hadn't been there before, written in her own handwriting. "The lady says she likes your skin." That night, Evelyn didn't sleep, because just outside her door, something breathed. And the nursery music box began to play, though no one had touched it in decades. Evelyn thought she was unraveling a family's buried past. She was wrong. The past was unraveling her. It began with the mirrors. Everyone in the house, even those draped in cloth, began to feel alive. She'd catch glimpses not of herself, but of other women, all pale, all weeping, all wearing red. One morning, Florence Braddock caught Evelyn standing for hours in front of a cracked mirror in the guest parlour. She said nothing, only placed a trembling hand on Evelyn's shoulder and whispered, "Never look too long. She likes the pretty ones." That night, Evelyn heard the creak of the east wing again. Only this time, her door opened. She bolted upright. Standing at the threshold was a tall woman, her skin the colour of drowned flesh, her hair long and black like riverweed. Her dress, deep red, clung to her as if soaked in something thicker than water. The woman's eyes, no whites, only black, bottomless. Evelyn tried to scream, but her voice caught. The woman didn't walk. She glided, and as she moved, the candlelight dimmed, not flickered, dimmed as if retreating from her presence. Evelyn scrambled back, hands grasping for something, anything. The woman leaned down. Her face was inches from Evelyn's. She opened her mouth, but her lips didn't part. Instead, a hand, a small, childlike hand, reached out from inside her mouth, stretching toward Evelyn's face. And then, Florence burst into the room, chanting in Latin, clutching a string of jet-black rosary beads. The woman in red let out a screech, unearthly and animalistic, before vanishing into the mirror behind her. Silence. The room felt 20 degrees colder. Florence collapsed into a chair, face pale, lips quivering. Evelyn stared at her. "What was that?" Florence didn't answer at first. Then, "That was the first Braddock wife. But I thought your father never married." "He didn't. Not in the church." Shh. Evelyn's eyes widened. Her name was Ginevra, a spiritualist, a medium. He met her in France before the war, brought her here, built this house on her terms, the Red Room, the East Wing, all hers. And then? Florence stared at the fire. She gave birth to something that didn't cry, and bled every Sunday. Evelyn shivered. We tried to lock her away, but Ginevra made herself a mirror, a prison, a window, and when she died, she didn't stay inside. The next morning, every mirror in the house was gone, shattered, and on the hallway wall, scrawled in ash, "You can break the glass, but I still see you." In the aftermath of Ginevra's reappearance, Evelyn no longer felt safe in her own skin. The house wasn't haunted. It was watching. Servants quit in droves. Rooms once warm now stank of mildew and old blood. Moths hatched in closets sealed for decades. The once pristine hallways echoed with footsteps that didn't belong to the living. Florence fell ill, rapidly. She wouldn't leave her room. She mumbled to herself constantly, usually the same phrase over and over, "Don't hang the frame, don't hang the frame." One stormy afternoon, Evelyn found a locked room behind the library. A door Florence had always said was just a broom closet. She pried it open. Inside, a portrait, draped in a white sheet. Dust coated everything, yet the air smelled fresh, frighteningly fresh. Evelyn removed the sheet. The canvas revealed a painting of herself, but she was posed differently. She sat in the red room, eyes lifeless, lips slightly parted as if mid-whisper. Her hands were folded gently, but the fingers were not her own. They were too long, too pale. Behind her stood a figure, shadowy, featureless, a blur of crimson and smoke. Evelyn stepped back. The candle she held flickered violently, then the unthinkable. A bead of blood dripped from the corner of the painting's mouth. Slowly, thickly, it slid down the canvas and began spelling something at the bottom. "I am already inside." Evelyn gasped and dropped the candle. It extinguished on impact, plunging the room into near darkness. She turned to flee, but the door slammed shut. Something moved behind her. Soft breath, cold breath. But when she turned, there was only the portrait. Now the figure behind her was smiling. Evelyn escaped through the window, cutting her arm on the way out. She rushed to Florence's room, bleeding, gasping. But Florence was gone. In her place, on the bed, the rosary snapped. The window was open. Curtains billowed in the salt wind. On the wall, written in something darker than ink, was a new message. She hung the frame, so I took her instead. That night, Evelyn had a fever dream. She was trapped inside the painting, screaming, pounding, while outside someone wearing her face walked away from the canvas. When she awoke, there were scratches on the inside of her mirror. Not her reflection, the glass itself. Something inside had tried to claw its way out, or worse, something inside had tried to claw its way in. The house had many rooms, but only one was locked from the outside. Evelyn had asked about it once. Florence went pale and said it was just a wine cellar, but Evelyn had been in that cellar. It was dry, empty, and not made of red oak. After Florence vanished, Evelyn knew where she had to go. She found the key beneath the Virgin Mary statue in the family chapel. Its iron teeth were warm to the touch, as if it had been waiting for her. That night, when the wind clawed at the shutters and the tide moaned against the cliffs, Evelyn went alone to the Red Room. The lock clicked open with a sound that echoed like a scream. The door opened inward. The scent hit her first, wax, rot, and something older, metallic, the kind of smell that lives inside butcher shops or churches that keep secrets. The walls were crimson, soaked in a hue that looked painted but wasn't. Candles ringed the room, flickering though no one had lit them. At the center was a stone altar, carved with symbols not Latin, not even human. And kneeling before it was a man in priest's garb, or rather, something wearing priest's garb. His back was to her, head bowed, whispering. Evelyn didn't speak, but he turned, slowly. His face was familiar, too familiar. It was her father's, but stretched thin, like skin pulled over something wrong. His eyes were too round, his smile didn't stop at the cheeks. "You came," he rasped. "You remember." Evelyn stepped back, but the door slammed shut. "We have been waiting, my little bride." He raised a hand, 4 fingers only. The candles roared to life. Shadows danced on the walls, forming faces. Florence, Ermina, even Ginevra, their mouths wide open in silent screaming. On the altar lay a second journal, bound in skin. Her name was carved on the front. Evelyn. The false priest beckoned. "Sign, and the house will give you back your voice, your real name." Evelyn ran. She grabbed the candle and hurled it at the altar. Flames erupted, but the thing just laughed. "We were inside before you were born." The fire spread. The floor cracked. The walls bled. Evelyn smashed the window and leapt into the night, crashing onto the cold, wet lawn below. Behind her, the Red Room burned, but as she looked up, the flames formed a shape, a woman's face. It was hers, smiling, and behind her, just visible in the fire, a line of children, holding hands, waiting to be remembered. Evelyn escaped the fire, but not the house. Braddock Hall may have been smouldering, but its grip hadn't loosened. She fled into the sea mist, barefoot and bloodied, journal clutched to her chest. The roads were silent. The townspeople pretended not to see her, or perhaps they truly didn't. She made it to the Newport Library by dawn, desperate to find proof, anything. In the town's restricted archive, beneath rotting census rolls and yellowed church registers, she found a box marked Braddock, Private Holdings. Inside was a book unlike the others, bound in worn velvet, pages lined in silver thread. It was called The Whisper Ledger. Every page contained names, hundreds, going back to 1751. Beside each name was a symbol, a date, and one of 2 words, given or taken. She flipped to the year 1886. There was Florence Braddock, taken, then Ginevra, then Ermina, and finally, her own name, Evelyn Harrow, 1890, taken. But she hadn't been taken, not yet. Or had she? As she stared at the word beside her name, it shifted, subtle, like fog moving under glass. The ink bled, and the word became given. She turned the page. There was a sketch of the Braddock estate, drawn in exquisite, eerie detail. Rooms marked with alchemical symbols, a note written in elegant hand. The house must feed, the daughters must remember. Evelyn traced the symbols and realized something horrifying. Every room where she had experienced something strange, the flickering candlelight, the whispering portraits, the shadow under the nursery door, they formed a circle. A summoning circle. She hadn't been exploring the house. She'd been activating it. She'd been waking it up. Evelyn backed away, heart pounding as the lights in the library dimmed. Books tumbled from shelves. A cold wind hissed through the stacks, and from behind her, the same voice that haunted Ermina's journal. "You opened the last door." Evelyn ran again, out into the streets, but everything was wrong. The town was silent. The sea was gone. The sky had turned red, and every building on the street now bore the Braddock crest. She hadn't escaped. She'd stepped fully into their world. The Braddocks hadn't vanished. They'd simply been waiting, watching, whispering through time. Evelyn collapsed on the courthouse steps, clutching the whisper ledger. Her reflection in the glass door wasn't her own. It was Ermina, smiling. Behind her, the priest, the red room, and dozens of voices whispering as one. Memory is the debt. Blood is the payment. She had remembered. Now she must pay. The red room was not a metaphor. It was real. Beneath Braddock Hall, beneath even the servants' quarters, was a chamber older than the house itself, older than Newport, older, perhaps, than memory. A circular space carved into bedrock, the walls slick with time, iron sconces that never extinguished, a ceiling so low it seemed to breathe. Evelyn was dragged there, or led. It hardly mattered. Her feet moved, but not by choice. At the center was the altar, a table of whalebone and obsidian. On it, carvings that mirrored those in the whisper ledger. A woman stood at the far end, Ermina Braddock, her body youthful, untouched by age. Her eyes, white, blank, not blind, but seeing something else. "The debt comes due," she whispered. Around the altar, others gathered. The priest, the governess, the cook. Evelyn once saw carrying jars that wriggled. All the people she'd assumed were long dead, or illusions. But they'd been here, waiting, sustained by the house, sustained by the blood. Evelyn tried to scream, but her voice was trapped inside her lungs, frozen like glass. Ermina approached, holding a silver chalice. "This," she said, "is remembrance. You asked to know." And she forced Evelyn to drink. The taste, salt, iron, smoke. Time fractured. She was no longer Evelyn. She was Florence in 1867, watching her fiancé slit his own throat at the altar. She was Ginevra in 1872, hearing the walls of Braddock Hall sing in a dead language. She was Ermina in 1880, choosing the priesthood of the blood over her own family. She was them all. And through it all, the same truth echoed. None of them were chosen. They were bred. The Braddocks had never been victims. They were vessels. Vessels for something that had arrived with the first ship from Cornwall. A black box hidden in the hull. Something the original Jonathan Braddock swore to protect in exchange for prosperity, land, power, influence, and immortality, paid for with daughters. Ermina circled Evelyn, hands raised. "You carry it now," she said. Evelyn's body began to shake. Her skin burned from the inside out. Blood trickled from her nose, her mouth, her eyes. Symbols lit up across the red room walls, one by one, pulsing like a heartbeat. She saw faces in the stone, eyes blinking, lips mouthing forgotten psalms. And then, silence. Her body dropped. The candle flames died. The red room went dark. For the first time in 2 centuries, the ritual was complete. But this time, something had gone wrong. The altar cracked. Ermina screamed, and a new voice rose from Evelyn's mouth, one that did not belong to her, one that hadn't spoken since 1751. And it wanted out. The voice that came from Evelyn's lips did not belong to her. It wasn't feminine, nor masculine. It was something older than both, something elemental, like thunder wrapped in ash. The people in the red room staggered back. Even Ermina fell to her knees, clutching her chest like something had clawed her from the inside. Evelyn's body floated. Eyes rolled back. Veins turned black beneath her skin. Then came the words, not English, not Latin, a language forgotten by all but the dead. The stone altar cracked further. The walls began to breathe, yes, breathe, in and out, like a living lung. One by one, the candles flickered and died. Then a flash, a scream. And when it cleared, Evelyn stood in the center of the chamber, alone. Everyone else, gone. No bones, no bodies. Just ashes and wet footprints that led nowhere. She looked at her hands. They were no longer hers. Pale, elongated. Her nails blackened. Veins crawling with heat. In her reflection, cast from the obsidian slab, she saw Ermina's face. But when she blinked, it changed. Another face. Then another. Then another. The priest. Florence. Jonathan Braddock himself. A chain of lives threaded into one vessel, her. Evelyn screamed, but it came out silent. Her voice was stolen. But one thing was clear now. This wasn't just about the Braddocks. This was about Newport itself. Every mansion, every church, every cobbled street. They were built upon the bones of an oath, a pact made before America was born. And Evelyn had become the key. Above ground, the skies over Braddock Hall turned red. The sea boiled. A storm, unlike anything in memory, slammed into the coast. Newspapers would later call it an act of God. But Evelyn knew better. It was an act of release. The entity within her no longer needed a name. It had worn too many. But it wanted a body, a voice, a way to be remembered. And so, it walked through the hidden tunnels below Newport, past bones arranged like altars, past children's toys soaked in rust, past portraits of women with scratched-out eyes. It walked, and Evelyn's body followed, until she came to the one place no one dared go. The old courthouse, abandoned, forgotten, but still intact. In its foundation, a door sealed in wax and bone. Evelyn placed her hand on it. The wax melted, the door breathed, and the thing inside her smiled. Let there be memory, it said. Let the old gods dine again. The courthouse was supposed to be abandoned, but the lights inside flickered as if they'd never left. Evelyn walked through the arched entrance, barefoot, soaked in stormwater, guided not by thought, but by the whisper behind her eyes. The air smelled of wax, salt, and rot. Dust clung to every wall, but the path ahead was clean, like something had been pacing, waiting. The courtroom itself stood frozen in time, gilded wood, shattered gavel, jury box filled with broken pews. And at the center, where judges once presided over men, a staircase led straight down. No one remembered it being there. That's because it wasn't meant for the living. Evelyn descended slowly. With each step, the temperature dropped. Paintings of forgotten founders stared from the walls, their eyes gouged or smeared as if they'd tried to scream from the canvas. Finally, at the bottom, the door stood waiting, 7 feet tall, made of whalebone and black iron, sealed with wax, string and symbols not seen since the fall of Carthage. Her fingers, shaking, reached for the bone latch. "They won't forgive you," whispered a voice, her father's voice, then her mother's, then Florence, then Ermina, then silence. She pulled. The door opened like a wound splitting flesh. Behind it, darkness didn't begin to describe it. This was void. This was memory before light. It was the cradle of what made men dream of power. The floor pulsed. Flesh. The walls hummed. Bone. Voices chorused. "We remember." Evelyn stepped inside. Her skin began to blister, but she didn't scream, because in the center of the room stood a stone table carved in concentric spirals, and on it, a book, bound in human leather, inked in something darker than blood. She opened it. Inside, her name, written over and over again. Then, the names of others, hundreds, thousands, dates going back to 1639, all Newport Fays, Millies, all tied to the pact. Evelyn was not just possessed, she was chosen, the last vessel, and she had arrived at the site of the original judgment. The courthouse hadn't been built atop something cursed. It was the curse, a lighthouse for the old god they'd once summoned beneath the soil, the god of memory. And now, it was awake. Through Evelyn's voice, it spoke. The age of forgetting ends. And above, across Newport, people began to remember things they never lived. Secrets, crimes, sacrifices. The city had written history in ink. But the old god had written it in blood. It started at precisely 3:13 a.m. A butcher in Brenton Village dropped his cleaver mid-cut and stared into the meat, not seeing it, but his mother's face, disfigured, buried under the cottage floorboards in 1859. A schoolteacher in Mill Street collapsed in her chair, scribbling Latin across her desk, Latin she had never learned, Latin that matched the script on the old bone door. From mansion to wharf, from asylum to church tower, people stopped, blinked, and remembered. Not their memories, others. Some began to confess crimes they never committed. Others accused long-dead ancestors, sobbing under invisible weight. One man hurled himself into the harbour, claiming the tide had whispered his grandfather's secrets into his bones. Newport had become haunted, not by ghosts, but by truth. The god of memory had opened the vault. Evelyn wandered the streets, barefoot, eyes glassy, her voice no longer hers. She chanted in forgotten tongues, drawing circles on doorsteps, walls, even children's faces. Some fell ill just by hearing her hum. Others followed her, like sleepwalkers caught in a sermon. It was then that the old families convened again, not in mansions, but in the cellar beneath the old Stag Tavern, once used for smuggling, now a shrine of desperation. The Remingtons, the Davenports, the Mayhews, the Crownins, the last bloodline keepers. They knew the pact had been broken, not by Evelyn, but by them. They were supposed to bury the truth every generation. But greed, pride, and cowardice let the final gate go unsealed. "She's not just a girl," one whispered. "She's the debt collector." "The vessel," said another. "The bookkeeper," said a third. They plotted again to silence her. But outside, Newport was unraveling. Church bells rang backwards, paintings bled varnish, graves exhaled dirt. The land itself seemed to remember who it belonged to, and it wasn't the living. And then the screaming began, from homes, from attics, from within walls. Not just terror, reckoning. People weren't being haunted. They were being judged. Evelyn appeared at Trinity Church, robes of ash and salt draped across her shoulders like a high priestess. She rang the funeral bell 13 times. "Tonight," she declared, "the ledger closes." The old families tried to run, but it was too late, because the town itself began to shift. Stone cracked, water surged, windows wept black condensation, and beneath it all, the heartbeat of the buried god rising. The god of memory had waited centuries for his city to remember, and now the final chapter was being written in the blood of those who once silenced it. July 3rd, 1890. The final night. It began with silence. Not the peaceful kind, the prelude kind, the breath before the axe falls. Then came the tremors. Not earthquakes, something older, deeper, like the land itself trying to remember what it was forced to forget. And then, the graves opened. Every cemetery in Newport ruptured at once. Tombstones cracked down the middle, coffins splintered from beneath. But no corpses rose. Only the memories did. They poured out like fog, shimmering silver wisps, each whispering names, secrets, cries, and laughter long erased. The air grew thick with histories, sins pressed flat by time, now breathing again. Evelyn stood in the center of the old town square, arms outstretched. Her eyes rolled back, her voice chanting not in tongues but in testimonies. Lydia Brewster, 14 years, drowned for what she saw. Jonas Crownin sealed behind the study wall. Father Dolan, the chapel furnace, the orphanage files. Every secret, every buried truth, spoken aloud, and the people listened, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Their ears burned, their chests felt carved open, some fell to their knees and vomited, others clawed at their skin, screaming names not their own. And in the mansions, the last bloodlines wept. The Remingtons, the Davenports, the Ashcrofts, those who had ruled the city in velvet and velvet-covered chains, could no longer run. The fog had entered their halls, their portraits aged before their eyes. Evelyn walked up the Mayhew estate steps barefoot, leaving no prints but trailing black water. They begged. She did not speak. The walls behind them cracked open. A hidden chamber revealed rows of infant skulls, still tagged with dates. "Ledger closed," she whispered, and the mansion collapsed inwards, without a sound. One by one the houses fell, not with fire, but with truth. It rained. Thick, black, ink-like rain. It stained every surface, but Evelyn's skin. She stepped back into the square. The fog circled her ankles like adoring pets. And then she looked up, eyes glowing like ancient lanterns. "The city remembers," she said softly. "Now, so will the world." The bell at Trinity rang one last time, and from far beneath Newport, so deep no man had ever dug, something answered. A sound like bones scraping stone. A voice that wasn't a voice, calling its child home. Evelyn smiled and stepped into the earth. When dawn came, it found no city. Newport still stood, but it was hollow. The mansions were husks, their velvet curtains turned to ash, the statues bled rust, the sea air carried not salt but soot. The people didn't flee. They simply forgot. The night of July the 3rd, 1890, was erased from every ledger, diary, sermon and archive, not censored, devoured. Evelyn did not return. No corpse, no trail. Just a whisper in the wells and a flicker in the gaslights that had no source. And still, some things remembered her. The pigeons avoided the square for decades. Children born near that date had strange eyes and older dreams. The fog never lifted, not fully. Tourists came and went, calling the town quaint, never noticing how the paintings in the museum shifted their eyes, how the town bell rang at odd times, never struck by human hand. And beneath the soil, the dead no longer slept. They didn't rise, they simply listened. Every time someone told a lie, every time a truth was buried, somewhere beneath Newport, the watchers stirred. And those who remembered Evelyn, the real Evelyn, not the portrait, not the poems, knew she had become something else entirely. Not a ghost, not a goddess, a ledger. The balance keeper of secrets. Every town has them. The girls they bury under shame, under silence, under the weight of men's sins. But now, the earth writes them down, and it never forgets. Evelyn was the first, but not the last. In 1932, a girl vanished in Savannah. In 1957, they burned a chapel in Quebec to hide the bones. In 1979, an entire mining town in Montana claimed they'd never heard of their missing daughters. And in each case, the fog came. The whispers followed. The graves opened. Not for the dead, but for the truth. If you go to Newport today, you'll see a town that seems perfectly normal. A place of wealth, weddings, and weekend getaway. But find a quiet street after midnight. Listen carefully. You might hear weeping, or the scraping of bone against stone, or the soft shuffle of a girl with no shoes, walking through time like a needle through skin. And if you do, don't run, don't pray, just tell the truth, whatever it is. Because Evelyn is still listening, and when the ledger is full, she will return.